I funded her med school. At the party, I heard her tell her sister, "I can't be seen with a muddy laborer anymore." I just raised my glass. Today, her licensing board called. They say loyalty is a priceless virtue, but in my experience, it has a very specific price tag. Mine cost me my 20s, my savings, and my peace of mind. Looking back now, as a 32-year-old man running my own commercial contracting business, the signs were always there. But when you grow up with someone, your vision gets clouded by the past. You see the kid they used to be, not the adult they are turning into. I am Wyatt. I make my living with concrete, steel, and calloused hands. I am a builder. And the woman I loved, Savannah, was a healer. Or at least, she was supposed to be. Our story did not start with a dramatic collision of two different worlds. It started on a quiet, middle-class suburban street where those two worlds lived right next door to each other. We grew up 3 houses apart. My family was loud, practical, and constantly working just to keep the lights on. Savannah's family was quiet, methodical, and aggressively focused on the future. Her father was an accountant, her mother managed a bank branch, and their house always smelled like lemon polish and ambition. Our house smelled like motor oil, laundry detergent, and whatever my mother had managed to throw into the slow cooker before her afternoon shift. While Savannah spent her childhood summers inside her air-conditioned room, rigorously studying for advanced placement tests and reading thick biology encyclopedias, I was down the street at my Uncle Victor's workshop. Uncle Victor was a master carpenter and a general contractor who believed that a boy only learned the value of $1 if his hands were covered in sawdust and blistered from a hammer. By the time I was 12 years old, I knew how to frame a wall, hang drywall, and read a tape measure faster than most grown men. I loved the tangible reality of it. You hit a nail, it goes into the wood. You measure twice, you cut once, and you build something that stands the test of time. There is an honest logic to manual labor that made sense to my brain. Savannah, on the other hand, lived in a world of theory and prestige. Even as a little girl, she talked about wearing a white coat. She wanted to be a surgeon. She wanted to save lives and be respected. I admired her intensely for it. To me, she was brilliant, a rising star that I was lucky enough to orbit. We would ride our bikes down to the local park, and she would tell me about human anatomy, explaining how the heart pumped blood or how muscles repaired themselves. I would listen, fascinated not just by the science, but by the fire in her eyes. I always felt like rough earth and gravel, and she always felt like the clear blue sky. I thought those two things could exist perfectly together. I thought the earth could support the sky. I was young, and I did not yet understand that some people only use the ground as a place to push off from so they can fly away. Things shifted from a childhood friendship to something deeper during the summer we both turned 15. It was that awkward age where everything feels heavy and important. We spent most of our evenings sitting on the slanted roof of Uncle Victor's storage shed, looking out over the neighborhood. I remember one specific night in late July. The air was thick and humid. Savannah was lying on her back, pointing out constellations, and I was sitting beside her, tracing the grain of the wood on the roof shingles. We started talking about the future, the way teenagers do when they think they have the whole world figured out. Savannah told me that she was going to get into the best university in the state, then go to a top-tier medical school, and become a renowned physician. She talked about the life she would have: the big house, the respect, the ability to walk into a room and have everyone listen to her. I smiled and told her my dream. I wanted to take over Uncle Victor's crew eventually, expand it, buy a fleet of heavy-duty trucks, and run the biggest commercial contracting firm in the county. I wanted to build the hospitals she would work in. She reached out, took my rough, calloused hand in her soft one, and told me we were going to conquer the world together. It was a 15-year-old's promise, but I anchored my entire soul to it. That night, we shared our first kiss under the summer stars, and from that moment on, we were inseparable. But even then, the fault lines were forming beneath our foundation. The resistance did not come from Savannah at first. It came from her parents. It was subtle, the kind of upper-middle-class condescension that is wrapped in polite smiles. When I would come over to pick her up for a movie date, Her father would look me up and down, taking in my faded jeans and work boots. He would ask me about my grades in a tone that suggested he already knew they were perfectly average. He would constantly mention the captain of the debate team, a boy from a wealthy family, suggesting that Savannah should invite him to study group. Her parents never explicitly told me I was not good enough, but they made sure I felt it in the air every time I walked into their home. They saw me as a temporary distraction, a blue-collar phase their brilliant daughter would eventually outgrow. I ignored their judgmental stares because Savannah always held my hand tightly when we walked out their front door. I believed our love was stronger than their prejudice. High school graduation was the moment the road officially split. Savannah graduated near the top of her class, heavily garlanded with academic honors, and was accepted into a prestigious and expensive university. Her parents threw a massive backyard party, toasting to her inevitable success. I was there, clapping the loudest, bursting with pride for her. But my own reality was entirely different. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table a month before graduation. My father looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped from decades of factory work. They told me the truth I already knew: there was no college fund. Between the mortgage, medical bills for my younger siblings, and the rising cost of groceries, they barely had enough to survive. Even with federal loans, the debt I would take on just to get a generic business degree would drown us all. I did not throw a tantrum. I knew the math. The very next day, I walked into a local construction company and asked for a full-time job. I started as a general laborer making $12 an hour. That was the reality of my 18-year-old life. While Savannah was packing her bags with brand new clothes and expensive laptops for her college dorm, I was waking up at 4:30 in the morning to pack a cheap cooler with sandwiches. I will never forget my first month on a commercial site. The noise was deafening. The physical toll was brutal. I spent 8 to 10 hours a day carrying heavy timber, hauling bags of cement, and swinging a hammer until my forearms cramped and my fingers went numb. I would come home covered in a thick layer of dust and sweat, every muscle screaming in agony. I had blisters on top of blisters. But when I got my first paycheck, holding that meager piece of paper in my torn hands, I felt a deep sense of pride. I was a working man. I was earning my way. Savannah went off to college, and we promised to make the long-distance work. I would drive 3 hours in my beat-up truck every other weekend to visit her. The contrast between us became glaringly obvious. She would walk out of her beautiful, ivy-covered dormitory, smelling of expensive perfume and coffee, surrounded by kids whose parents paid for everything. I would step out of a rusty truck, wearing steel-toed boots, smelling of gasoline and hard labor. But she still smiled when she saw me. She still ran into my arms. I clung to that. I kept my head down, saved every penny of my $12 an hour, and focused on the day when I could give her the life she deserved. I did not realize I was already building a monument to my own heartbreak. For years past, Savannah crushed her undergraduate studies with a near-perfect grade point average, and I worked my way up from a grunt laborer to an assistant foreman. I was making better money now, hoarding it in a high-yield savings account. I had a vision. I was going to buy my first commercial work truck, secure my general contractor license, and start bidding on my own jobs. I was so close to making my dream a reality. Then came the medical school acceptances. Savannah got into her top choice program. We celebrated, but the joy was incredibly short-lived. A week later, I drove over to her apartment, and before I even turned the engine off, she came running out, tears streaming down her face. She climbed into the passenger seat of my truck and completely broke down. Between heavy sobs, she handed me a stack of financial aid letters. The numbers printed on those pages were staggering. The tuition alone was over $60,000 a year. That did not even include the exorbitant cost of living in the city where the medical school was located, the outrageously expensive textbooks, the specialized equipment, and the mandatory fees. Savannah's parents had drained their savings putting her through her undergraduate degree, and their credit was tied up in their own mortgage. They could not help her anymore. The financial aid package she was offered barely covered a fraction of the total cost. I have to decline the offer, Wyatt, she cried, burying her face in her hands. I have to give up. I can't afford it. My dream is dead. Seeing the woman I loved shattered like that triggered every protective instinct in my body. I could not stand the thought of her brilliant mind going to waste because of a dollar sign. I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of the engine, looking at my hands resting on the steering wheel. I thought about the business I wanted to build. I thought about the truck I had been eyeing, the tools I wanted to buy. I had saved for 4 grueling years, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and my own youth to build a safety net. Then I looked at Savannah. I pulled her into a hug, kissed the top of her head, and made the decision that would alter the course of my life forever. You are not giving up, I told her firmly. I have savings. It's enough to cover your first semester's tuition and get you moved into an apartment. I will pay your rent. I will buy your groceries. You focus on becoming a doctor. I will handle the rest. She looked at me in shock, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief. She begged me not to do it, saying she knew how hard I had worked for that money. But I was stubborn. I told her we were a team. I told her this was an investment in our shared future. That day, I took the blueprint of my own life, tore it to shreds, and laid it down like a carpet for her to walk on. My cash savings solved the immediate crisis of getting her in the door, but medical school is a 4-year marathon of bleeding money. The semester fees kept coming, the rent was high, and my foreman's salary, while respectable, was not enough to pay for both of our lives outright. Savannah had to take out massive private student loans to cover the enormous gap. Because she had no real income and a thin credit history, the private loan companies required a cosigner. Her parents refused, citing their own financial instability and nearing retirement. Savannah was terrified. If she did not secure the loans, she would be kicked out of the program midway through her first year. Once again, I stepped up to the plate. I remember sitting in the sterile, brightly lit office of a financial officer, holding a heavy metal pen over a thick stack of legal documents. The officer, a woman with reading glasses and a tight smile, explained the gravity of what I was doing. She made it crystal clear, by co-signing these loans, I was becoming legally and financially responsible for a staggering amount of debt. If Savannah defaulted, missed a payment, or simply decided to walk away, my wages would be garnished, my credit would be destroyed, and my future would be ruined. It was a terrifying commitment for a guy who swung a hammer for a living. I looked over at Savannah. She reached across the desk and grabbed my free hand. Her eyes were full of absolute devotion. Wyatt, I promise you, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I will never let anything happen to you. As soon as I am an attending physician, I will pay every single cent back. We are going to have a beautiful life. You are my hero. I love you so much. I believed her. I believed in us. I took a deep breath, pressed the pen to the paper, and signed my name. Over the next 3 years, I signed my name on 5 more of those documents, effectively chaining a financial anvil to my ankles so Savannah could wear her white coat. I did not view it as a burden at the time. I viewed it as the ultimate act of loyalty. I was building the foundation of our family. What followed were the 4 hardest, most brutal years of my life. To keep up with Savannah's living expenses and my own meager bills, I had to work an insane amount of hours. I took every double shift, every weekend gig, and every dangerous high-altitude job that paid hazard rates. The physical toll was indescribable. I remember one specific week in late January. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and we were pouring concrete for a massive commercial foundation. The wind cut through my heavy jacket like a razor. During a chaotic moment on the site, I stepped backward onto a discarded piece of lumber, and a rusty 3-inch nail drove straight through the thick rubber sole of my boot and deep into my heel. The pain was blinding. I hobbled to the site medic, who pulled it out and told me I needed to go to the emergency room for proper stitches and a tetanus shot. But emergency rooms cost money. Savannah's rent was due in 2 days, and her textbook fees had just wiped out my checking account. I told the medic to clean it with alcohol, wrap it tight, and wrap it in duct tape. I popped 4 painkillers, walked with a severe limp, and finished my 10-hour shift in the freezing mud. I bled for her dream. Literally. Meanwhile, Savannah's world was expanding, and mine was shrinking. The distance between us grew, not just physically, but mentally. During her first year of medical school, she called me every night, crying about the stress and thanking me for keeping her afloat. By her second year, the calls dropped to 3 times a week. By her third year, clinical rotations started, and she was practically a ghost. When we did talk, the tone had changed. She started using heavy medical jargon, speaking rapidly about complex cases, dropping acronyms I did not understand. When I asked her to explain them, she would sigh, a sharp, impatient sound, and say, "It is too complicated to explain, Wyatt, you wouldn't get it." She moved out of the cheap apartment I first rented for her and into a high-end complex closer to the hospital, living with 2 other medical students from wealthy families. When I visited her, exhausted and smelling of sweat and sawdust, she would look at my clothes with a subtle cringe. She stopped wanting to hold my hand in public if I had grease under my fingernails. She was shedding her old life, and I was slowly realizing that I was a part of the skin she was leaving behind. The moment I knew the foundation was completely cracked was during a dinner party in her final year. I had driven 4 hours to see her for her birthday. She told me she had invited a few of her medical school friends to join us. I wanted to treat her, so I made a reservation at a very expensive, upscale restaurant downtown. I wore my best button-down shirt and a pair of clean jeans, but next to her friends, who showed up in tailored suits, designer dresses, and imported watches, I looked exactly like what I was, a blue-collar worker out of his depth. The dinner was agonizing. They spent 2 hours discussing hospital politics, prestigious residency programs, and summer vacations in Europe. I sat there in silence, drinking water, feeling like a ghost. At one point, a guy sitting across from me, a handsome future surgeon whose father was the head of a hospital board, looked at me as if noticing me for the first time. "So, Wyatt," the guy asked with a polite but hollow smile, "Savannah never really talks about what you do. Are you in medicine too?" Before I could even open my mouth to say I was in construction, Savannah jumped in. Her voice was too loud, too fast, and laced with panic. "Oh, Wyatt is a project manager," she lied smoothly, her eyes darting away from mine. "He works in corporate development for infrastructure, mostly logistics and office administration. Very boring desk stuff." I froze. I stared at her, feeling a cold not form in my stomach. She was ashamed of me. She was ashamed of the hard labor that was currently paying for the expensive steak she was cutting into. She had rebranded me to make me acceptable to her new elite circle. I did not expose her lie. I just nodded slowly and looked down at my plate. When the bill came, it was nearly $500. Without missing a beat, Savannah slid the leather folder over to me. Her friends did not even reach for their wallets. I placed my debit card inside, paying for a table full of people who thought I was a corporate manager, using money I had earned by breaking my back in the freezing rain. The ride back to her apartment was suffocatingly quiet. I asked her why she lied. She brushed it off, saying it was just easier to explain than going into the details of contracting work. She called me overly sensitive and went to bed. I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could finance a life I was no longer welcome in. If you are enjoying the story so far, please take a second to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a dramatic update. Also, leave a comment below with the name of the city you are watching from. Every single comment helps the video reach more people, and I love seeing where you are all from. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to the story. The day of Savannah's medical school graduation arrived on a sweltering Saturday in May. For me, it felt like the finish line of a marathon I had been running for 11 years. I had spent the last decade pouring my life force into her success, and today, she was finally becoming a doctor. I wanted to look like I belonged by her side, so I went to a local tailor and bought my very first high-quality suit. It cost me $800, money that could have gone toward a new generator for my crew, and I didn't care. I wanted to be the man she was proud to show off. As I sat in the crowded auditorium, the air was thick with the scent of expensive flowers and academic prestige. When Savannah's name was finally called, and she walked across that stage in her green velvet-trimmed gown, my heart nearly burst. I stood up and cheered louder than anyone in that room. I didn't see the doctor. I saw the girl from 3 houses down who used to ride bikes with me to the park. I saw the woman I had bled for, the one whose dreams I had protected with every ounce of my strength. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to her parents' house. They had gone all out, renting white tents, hiring professional caterers, and inviting what seemed like half the medical community in the state. I walked into that party feeling like a king, but within 20 minutes, the old familiar chill set in. Savannah was constantly pulled away by classmates and senior surgeons. Her parents were busy introducing her to important people, donors, hospital administrators, and eligible-looking young residents. I tried to mingle, holding a glass of expensive champagne that tasted like copper and ash. Whenever I tried to join a conversation, the room would go slightly quiet, as if I were a glitch in a high-definition movie. I caught Savannah's mother looking at my hands that were clean today but still bore the permanent scars and thickened knuckles of a decade of masonry and framing. She didn't offer me a seat at the main table. Instead, she pointed me toward the buffet line like I was a distant cousin they were obligated to feed. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that once the guests left, it would just be us again. The party was in full swing when I needed to find a quiet moment to myself. The noise of 100 doctors talking about their pedigrees was starting to give me a headache. I headed into the house to use the restroom, navigating through the hallways I had known since I was a kid. On my way back out, I passed the door to her father's wood-paneled study. It was cracked open just a few inches. I heard Savannah's voice. It was sharp, clear, and lacked any of the warmth she usually saved for me. She was talking to her sister, Hazel, and her mother. I stopped, not out of a desire to eavesdrop, but because the first sentence I heard felt like a bucket of ice water being poured down my spine. "So, when are you and Wyatt going to pick a date for the wedding?" Hazel asked. "Now that you're officially Dr. Savannah, it's time to celebrate the man who got you here." I heard Savannah let out a long, weary sigh. Then came the laugh. A cold, condescending sound that I had never heard from her before. "Wedding? Hazel, let's be realistic," Savannah said. "I'm a doctor now. I'm entering a world of high-stakes medicine and social circles that Wyatt can't even pronounce. How am I supposed to bring a man who smells like wet cement and sawdust to a board of directors dinner?" "But Savannah," Hazel whispered, sounding genuinely shocked, "he paid for everything. He co-signed your loans. He worked double shifts for years so you could study. You wouldn't even have that degree without him. And I'm grateful for that, I really am," Savannah replied, her tone becoming ice-cold. "But you don't keep the scaffolding once the building is finished, Hazel. Wyatt was a stepping stone. He was what I needed to get through the hard times, but he doesn't match my new life. I need a husband who is an equal, not someone I have to explain away as a project manager, just so I don't die of embarrassment." I stood there in the hallway, my fingers gripping the wall so hard the plaster felt like it might crumble. Every drop of sweat I'd shed, every hour of overtime, and that 3-inch nail through my foot, it all flashed before my eyes. I wasn't her partner. I was a tool she had used until the edge went dull. The pain was so intense it actually turned into a strange, vibrating numbness. I didn't burst into the room. I didn't scream or break the expensive furniture. My years on construction sites had taught me one thing: when a structure is failing, you don't stand under it and shout, you get out before it collapses on you. I took a deep breath, adjusted my $800 suit jacket, and walked into the study. The 3 of them froze. The color drained from Savannah's face instantly. She looked at me, her mouth hanging open, searching for a lie that wouldn't come. I didn't give her the chance. I walked over to the desk, picked up a fresh glass of champagne, and looked her dead in the eye. I didn't look at her with anger. I looked at her with the same detached observation I'd use on a piece of warped timber that needed to be thrown in the scrap pile. "Don't worry about the explanation, Savannah," I said, my voice steady and low. I heard everything. It's funny how the view changes once you get to the top of the mountain. I raised the glass, the bubbles catching the light of the study chandelier. To the new Dr. Savannah, I said clearly, "May your success bring you exactly what you deserve." I drained the glass, set it down on her father's mahogany desk with a firm click, and turned around. Savannah started to say my name, her voice trembling, but I didn't stop. I walked out through the party, past the tents, past the laughing doctors, and got into my old truck. I drove away in a silence so thick I could hear my own heart beating against my ribs. The next morning, my phone was silent. No apology. No explanation. By noon, I saw that she had blocked me on every social media platform. By evening, I realized she had changed the locks on the apartment I was still paying for. She had discarded the scaffolding, just like she said. But Savannah forgot one very important thing about construction. If you remove the support structure before the foundation is settled, the whole thing tends to come crashing down. For the first 2 weeks, I lived in a state of hyper-focused routine. I went to the job site at 5 a.m., I worked until my body couldn't move, and I went to bed. I was mourning a woman who never actually existed. The Savannah I loved was a ghost. The one who lived in that house was a stranger. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with a local area code. I answered, thinking it was a new client. "Mr. Wyatt? This is the Office of Financial Verification for the State Medical Board," a professional, clipped voice said. "We are processing the final licensing and residency credentials for a Dr. Savannah. Are you currently the primary cosigner on her outstanding private educational loans?" I felt a surge of adrenaline. "I am," I said slowly. "Excellent," the officer continued. As part of her transition into her residency program at the university hospital, Dr. Savannah is attempting to refinance and consolidate her debt into a physician-specific loan package. This is a requirement for her to clear the board's financial ethics and stability check before her medical license can be fully activated. Since you are the cosigner on the original 6 loans, we need your formal signature and a notarized verification of your current income and assets to release the old debt and move it into the new program. I gripped the phone. "And if I don't sign?" There was a brief pause. "Well, if the refinancing isn't completed by the end of the month, her current loans will remain at their high-interest tier, and more importantly, her financial clearance for the residency program will be denied. She cannot begin practicing medicine or start her residency without this being finalized. It's a standard mandatory procedure." I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the dust on the dashboard. Savannah needed me. She needed the muddy laborer to sign a piece of paper so she could officially become the elite doctor who was too good for him. I didn't call the board back. I didn't call Savannah. I simply went back to work. 48 hours later, the Do Not Disturb filter on my phone started catching the first waves of the storm. It began with a text that was almost offensive in its casualness. "Hey Wyatt, I think the board reached out. Can you just handle that paperwork real quick? It's holding up some of my HR onboarding. Thanks." I didn't reply. The next day, the tone shifted. "Wyatt, this isn't funny. I need that signature by Friday or my residency start date gets pushed back. Call them back now." By Thursday, the casualness was gone, replaced by the raw, jagged edge of panic. My voicemail was full of her messages. Her voice was higher, faster, the sound of a person realizing the stepping stone had just become a mountain she couldn't climb. "Wyatt, please," she sobbed into my voicemail. "They told me if the verification doesn't come through by tomorrow, they're giving my residency spot to the alternate candidate. 11 years of work will be gone. You can't do this to me. I know you're angry about the party, but don't ruin my life over a misunderstanding." I finally picked up the phone on Friday morning. "Hello, Savannah," I said. My voice was as flat as a leveled slab of granite. "Oh, thank God," she gasped. "Wyatt, you have to go to the board office. Right now. I'll send you the address. Please, just sign the release so I can start my life." "Your life?" I asked. "The one where I'm a muddy laborer? The one where you're embarrassed to stand next to me?" There was a suffocating silence on the other end. I'm sorry, she whispered, and for the first time in years, she sounded like the girl from 3 houses down. But I knew better now. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. Please, Wyatt. I'll do anything. Anything? I asked. Good. Because I'm not signing a single thing until we settle the bill for the last 11 years. I told her to meet me at a roadside diner 2 miles from my current job site. It was a place where men in neon vests and grease-stained caps ate breakfast. When Savannah pulled up in her parents' polished German SUV, wearing a crisp designer suit, she looked like an alien. She sat across from me in a vinyl booth that smelled of old coffee and fried onions. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I didn't offer her a drink. I didn't ask how she was. I reached into my work bag and pulled out a heavy manila envelope. Inside was a promissory note, drafted by a lawyer I had spent $3,000 on over the last 4 days. It was an itemized list of every dollar I had ever spent on her: tuition, rent, groceries, books, and even the interest on the loans I had co-signed. The total came to $284,500. This is a legal contract, I said, sliding it across the sticky table. It states that you owe me this amount as a personal loan. It sets a repayment schedule of $4,000 a month, starting the day you receive your first paycheck as an attending physician, with a smaller installment plan starting during your residency. Savannah stared at the number. Wyatt, this is insane. I can't pay this. Then don't sign it, I said, reaching for the paper. And I won't sign the board's verification. You won't be a doctor. You'll just be a med school graduate with a mountain of debt and no way to pay it. You'll be exactly where I was at 18, except I didn't have $500,000 in loans over my head. She looked at the clock on the diner wall. She had 2 hours to get the verification to the board. If I sign this, you'll call the board? She asked, her voice trembling. Sign the contract, Savannah, I said. She grabbed a pen and scribbled her name so hard she nearly tore the paper. I took the contract, checked the signature, and put it back in my bag. Thank you, she said, standing up. Now, go call the board. Please. I looked up at her and smiled. It wasn't a mean smile. It was the smile of a man who had finally finished a job to specifications. I never said I'd call the board, Savannah, I said calmly. Read the contract again. It's an acknowledgement of debt. There is no clause in there that requires me to sign your licensing paperwork. I told you I'd consider it. I've considered it, and the answer is no. The look on Savannah's face in that moment was worth every drop of sweat I'd ever lost. It wasn't just anger, it was the realization that the man she thought was too simple to understand her world had just used her own elite tools against her. You can't do this, she screamed, her voice echoing off the diner's tin ceiling. That's fraud. That's illegal. No, I said, standing up and sliding my own check for the coffee onto the table. Fraud is taking a man's life savings under the pretense of a future you never intended to give him. Illegal is what the board might find when they look into your financial ethics now that your cosigner has officially withdrawn his support. I walked out of the diner and drove back to my site. I spent the rest of the day finishing a retaining wall. I didn't check my phone. I didn't listen to the 62 voicemails she left, ranging from sobbing apologies to screaming threats. The deadline passed at 5 p.m. Because I refused to verify my income or release the old loans, the refinancing failed. Because the refinancing failed, Savannah's financial clearance for her residency was revoked. She lost her spot at the university hospital. She had to spend the next 8 months working as a research assistant for peanuts while she scrambled to find a new cosigner, a task that proved nearly impossible given her parents' credit and her now tarnished financial history. She finally got her license nearly a year later, but she had to take a residency in a tiny, underfunded hospital in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of miles away from the elite social circles she craved. She was a doctor, yes, but the stepping stone had ensured she had to climb the hard way, just like I did. 6 months after the diner meeting, I had my lawyer file the paperwork to enforce the promissory note. Savannah tried to fight it in court, claiming the contract was signed under duress and that I hadn't fulfilled my end of a verbal agreement to help her with the board. but my lawyer was better than hers. The contract was a masterpiece of simplicity. It was a straightforward acknowledgement of money spent on her behalf, which she had voluntarily signed in the presence of witnesses at the diner. The judge didn't care about our breakup or the medical board. He cared about the $284,000 that I had documented with 10 years of bank statements and receipts. The court ruled in my favor. Because she had finally started her delayed residency, the court ordered a legal garnishment of her wages. Every single month, a significant portion of her paycheck is deposited directly into my business account. I used the first 3 payments to buy a brand new, heavy-duty commercial truck, the one I had dreamed of since I was 15. I hired 3 more guys and officially launched Wyatt's Commercial Contracting. I'm sitting in that truck now, looking at a blueprint for a new community clinic we're starting next week. My hands are still calloused, and I still smell like sawdust and hard work. But I'm no longer the scaffolding for someone else's dream. I am the architect of my own life. Savannah thought she could use me to reach the top and then kick the ladder away. She found out that when you build your life on a foundation of lies and entitlement, it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, the whole thing eventually settles, and the cracks always show. I built her career, and now she is quite literally building mine, one monthly payment at a time. And I have never felt more successful. I built my life back up from the foundation, and she's paying for the bricks every single month. Some people call me ruthless for letting her licensing stall out after I got the contract, but I call it building a boundary. Am I the bad guy for securing my money first and letting her deal with the consequences of her own arrogance? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my boots. See you in the next one.